The Mexican-American War. In the election of 1844, the biggest political issue in the United States was territorial expansion. The Republic of Texas had successfully revolted against Mexico in 1936. The Republic was largely populated by American emigres, but its annexation would anger Mexico. Mexico considered Texas a breakaway province and threatened war if the United States annexed it. President Andrew Jackson had recognized Texas independence. Britain had abolished slavery, and if Texas did the same, it would provide a western haven for runaways to match one in the north. A Texas not in the United States would also stand in the way of what was deemed America's manifest destiny to overspread the continent. In the 1844 presidential election, Democrat James K. Polk was the only candidate who favored the annexation of Texas. His opponent, the Whig Henry Clay, opposed annexation. Before Polk's inauguration, President John Tyler sought to complete the annexation of Texas. Tyler was warned by Mexico that annexing Texas could lead to war, but Tyler was determined to make Texas part of the United States. While the Senate had defeated an earlier treaty that would annex the Republic, Tyler urged Congress to pass a joint resolution, relying on its constitutional power to admit states. On his final evening in office, March 3, 1845, Tyler offered annexation to Texas according to the terms of the resolution. James K. Polk assured Texans that the United States would defend Texas and would fix its southern border at the Rio Grande, as claimed by Texas, rather than at the Nueces River as claimed by Mexico. Public sentiment in Texas favored annexation. In July 1845, a Texas convention ratified annexation, and afterwards voters approved it. In December 1845, Polk signed a resolution annexing Texas, and it became the 28th state. Mexico broke diplomatic relations with the United States on passage of the joint resolution in March 1845. Annexation increased tensions with Mexico, which had not recognized Texas's independence. In late 1845, Polk sent diplomat John Slidell to Mexico to purchase New Mexico and California for $30 million and secure Mexico's agreement to a Rio Grande border for Texas. Slidell arrived in Mexico City in December 1845. Mexican President Jose Joaquin de Herrera was unwilling to receive him because of the hostility of the Mexican public towards the United States. Herrera soon thereafter was deposed by a military coup led by General Mariano Paredes, a hardliner who pledged to take back Texas from the United States. Polk prepared for a potential war with Mexico, sending an army to Texas led by Brigadier General Zachary Taylor. General Taylor led U.S. troops on a march toward the Rio Grande River. U.S. troops would occupy the land below the Nueces River and claim the area east of the Rio Grande for the United States. Taylor and Commodore David Conner of the U.S. Navy, commanding American ships off the Mexican coast, were ordered to avoid provoking a war while preparing for conflict and to respond to any Mexican aggression. Polk hoped that a show of force by the U.S. military under Taylor and Conner could avert war and lead to negotiations with the Mexican government. Initially, Taylor's army did not advance further than Corpus Christi, at the mouth of the Nueces. On January 13, 1846, Polk ordered Taylor to proceed to the Rio Grande, though it took him time to prepare for the march. In late March 1846, General Taylor reached the Rio Grande, and his army camped across the river from Matamoros, Tamaulipas. In April, After Mexican General Pedro de Ampudia demanded that Taylor return to the Nueces River, Taylor began a blockade of Matamoros. Led by General Anastasio Torrejon, 2,000 Mexican troops crossed the Rio Grande and ambushed U.S. troops at Fort Texas, killing over a dozen American soldiers. U.S. troops then defeated Mexico at the Battle of Palo Alto, the first official battle of the war. General Taylor declared victory when Mariano Arista's Mexican troops were forced to retreat. The Battle of Resaca de la Palma began when Mexican troops attacked Fort Texas, which they believed to be in Mexican territory. Mexican troops were forced to retreat and suffered anywhere between 250 and 400 casualties. Word reached Washington on May 9th of the fighting in Texas. Polk immediately sent a war message to Congress on the ground that Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil. The House overwhelmingly approved a resolution declaring war and authorizing the President to accept 50,000 volunteers into the military. Nonetheless, the House resolution passed the Senate in a 40-2 vote. Congress approved the declaration of war, but some Americans were against it and thought that Polk was simply trying to steal or take more land for the United States. When war was declared, Captain John Fremont led a group of American settlers in rebellion against Mexico in California, and they declared California an independent republic. Independence was short-lived because the U.S. occupied California very soon afterwards. In August of 1846, General Stephen Kearny took an army of about 2,500 men into Santa Fe, New Mexico. They met no resistance and easily took control of New Mexico. In September of 1846, the U.S. captured the Mexican city of Monterrey. General Taylor's troops had first occupied the cities of Matamoros and Camargo in northern Mexico before attacking Monterrey. The Battle of Monterrey was a hard-fought battle with a series of losses for both sides, but after several days the U.S. eventually won. In December 1846, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna declared himself Mexico's president. Santa Anna had been in exile in Cuba. He had been kicked out of Mexico after one of his several turns as the president of Mexico. While in Cuba, he had exchanged letters with President Polk, and he had promised President Polk that if the Americans would help him return to Mexico, he would establish himself again as Mexican president, and he would forge a peace treaty with the United States, ending the war. He ended up breaking that deal, installing himself as president, but attacking the United States instead of making a peace treaty with it. So in February 1847, General Taylor and Santa Anna, now leading Mexican forces, faced off near Buena Vista. Taylor's troops were outnumbered, but they were victorious with the use of heavy artillery. The Battle of Buena Vista was Taylor's greatest victory of the war and helped him get elected as President of the United States in 1848. After the Battle of Buena Vista, the U.S. changed strategies. General Winfield Scott would lead an army against Mexico by landing at Veracruz in the Gulf of Mexico and then marching towards Mexico City in an attempt to capture it and end the war. The first major battle in this campaign was at the Battle of Cerro Gordo, where the U.S. won in April 1847. The U.S. was outnumbered by Mexican troops in this battle, but killed or wounded nearly 1,000 Mexican soldiers took another 3,000 prisoners, and seized most of the Mexican army's supplies in the battle. In September 1847, General Scott and his American troops wore down a weary Mexican army and seized Mexico City. The capture of Mexico City marked the unofficial end of the Mexican-American War. Why did Mexico win only one minor battle in the war, despite outnumbering the Americans in every major battle? One reason was that Mexico is very divided politically. Conservative centralists, who were supported by the military and the church, fought against decentralized liberals. And because of this fighting, only 7 of 19 Mexican states supported the war against the United States by contributing soldiers, money, or supplies. The other 12 states were, frankly, uninterested in the war. Another reason for the American victory was that in the northern Mexican states, there was very little civilian opposition to the United States. The U.S. found little resistance from this population because Comanche and Apache raids there had left thousands of people dead, resulted in thousands more being kidnapped, destroyed, or stolen livestock, and had left the population demoralized. In addition to that, by the 1840s, New Mexico was economically dependent on the Santa Fe Trail that connected it to Independence, Missouri. And by the 1840s, many Californios also favored annexation by either America or Great Britain. Another reason for America's victory in the war, the U.S. Army was better trained and better equipped. The Mexican Army was poorly trained and unmotivated. Most of the soldiers were conscripted or draftees, and desertion was common. The U.S. officers, on the other hand, were well trained, but many of the volunteers were undisciplined and even committed crimes against Mexican civilians, including looting and killing. The Mexican Army used inferior weapons in the war. They used surplus British muskets from the Napoleonic Wars, whereas the Americans had modern weapons such as revolvers and rifles that were superior to the Mexican muskets. American artillery was also superior to Mexican artillery throughout the war. The difference here wasn't so much the technology, which was about the same, but the American training was much superior. There were prominent critics of the war at home in the United States. One of them was Congressman Joshua Giddings, a Democrat, who called this an aggressive, unholy, and unjust war. Giddings said, "In the murder of Mexicans upon their own soil, or in robbing them of their country, I can take no part, either now or hereafter." Henry David Thoreau wrote Civil Disobedience, an essay, while in jail for refusing to pay taxes to support the war. U.S. Congressman Abraham Lincoln from Illinois opposed the war and introduced spot resolutions, questioning whether the spot where blood had been shed in the initial battles in Texas was really U.S. soil. Ulysses Grant served in the war, but recalled afterwards that he considered it one of the most unjust wars ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation.